I'd like to start off our portion of the show by giving you a taste of a little something we call rock and roll, 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 rockin' and a rollin', rock and roll, rock and roll.
All right, welcome to year number 2 of the It's Only Rock and Roll podcast. I'm Don 𝗙𝗵𝗀𝗶𝗄, and yes, the show is exactly 1 year old. Can you believe it? And what did I get as an anniversary present? A complete system failure and breakdown of the main computer where I do all the editing and pretty much everything involved with the show. So that's why we haven't been around for a little bit. And then, to make matters worse, when I attempt to order a nice, brandy new system straight from the good people at Intel, I received not 1, but 2 consecutive non-functioning units. So I've been spending my days playing catch with the UPS man. But enough bitching and moaning, that's not what you came for. But before we start, I do want to thank you guys for all the great emails and suggestions I've received over the year, almost none of which I follow, and most of all, your loyalty to the show. Apparently, we've got a lot of rock and roll nerds out there besides me, and hopefully we'll be around for another year to keep the interviews and musical insight coming. And today is a prime example of what we do. I am privileged to have one of the most uniquely talented singers and musicians of the rock era, and one of the few piano players who front their band. Starting in the mid-60s, he co-wrote classics like 𝗀𝗍𝗄𝗃 Shade of Pale, Conquistador, and along with his band Procol Harum, helped usher in a new musical term to the lexicon, progressive rock. Direct from England, we talk with Brooker. Our guest today is the founding member and soulful lead singer pianist for Procol Harum, a band who in the mid-1960s laid the foundation for what would become known as progressive rock. He co-wrote AOR classics like Conquistador, Simple Sister, Hamburg, and the song that's been officially recognized as Britain's most played record of the past 70 years, 𝗀𝗍𝗄𝗃 Shade of Pale. It is my honor to welcome to the It's Only Rock and Roll podcast, Brooker. Good evening, Gary.
Good evening. How are you?
Pretty good. Well, thank you for doing the show. It's so great to have you here.
There's nothing else to do anyway.
Good point.
We're locked down.
Well, you're slowly coming out of the COVID insanity. The UK is emerging from its lockdown. How have you kept busy musically during the past year?
Well, clearing out a lot of things. I've always meant to clear out, but never had the time. In fact, in the course of that, I was clearing out CDs because I had like 1,000 CDs. Ones I'm talking about, ones I've got as demos, and most of them have one track on it, you know. And I thought, well, I'll throw them away ones I don't want, and the rest I'll put them onto a couple of CDs.
Sure.
And that's what I was doing. I did find a couple of recordings, not particularly old, of Procol Harum of 2 newish songs. So it was worth doing that because actually they're coming out next week.
Oh, great!
May the 7th is coming out, so that was worth finding.
Absolutely.
No, but they're not old. You know, they're not from the 70s or 60s. These are just done, well, we're not sure when, but it wasn't more than about 4 or 5 years ago, called Missing Persons.
So we'll be looking forward to that.
Yeah, hope so. It'll be out on a CD available from your favorite retail outlet or Amazon or something.
Fantastic.
And also you can download it.
Great.
Yeah.
This may come as a shock to you, but you are my very first member of the Order of the British Empire that I've had on the show.
Oh.
How does that feel? I mean, you know, in America, it's kind of hard to wrap our brains around that, but what kind of an honor was that for you?
Oh, it was a great honor. Well, of course, it's no good being a Republican with something like that. You have to appreciate the good points about monarchies. I mean, our Queen, especially in the last few weeks, with her husband dying,
right,
was, of course, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who is, in fact, Grandmaster, or was Grandmaster of the Most Excellent Order. And I just looked at my certificate here and I saw that he'd signed it. So the Queen signed it on the top. So I was very pleased to get it. It is a great honour here to have that thing bestowed. It's not done lightly. Right. You can't bribe anybody. You know, it just comes up out of the blue and you're happy.
Sure.
You also get a drink at Buckingham Palace out there.
That's not bad.
Oh, no.
Talk a little bit about life growing up in post-war Middlesex, England. That's where you're from, right?
Yeah, until I was 9, I was in Middlesex. Yeah.
You came from a musical household, and father played pedal steel?
No, he didn't. He played Hawaiian steel guitar.
Oh, okay.
No pedals involved. That's what I grew up with. I thought that was music, because that's all I ever saw or heard. And I thought most women wore grass skirts. But By the time I got about to, well, probably when I moved out of that environment, that was when I realised that not everybody had grass skirts and there were other sorts of music. But I was quite happy until then. But it was, it was post-war Britain, which was a bit grey, but you don't know anything when you're little. If what you haven't had, you don't miss. The fact that we didn't have anything like coffee, but we never had coffee anyway, so we just liked tea.
Sure. What's your earliest memory of hearing rock and roll? Do you remember the first single you bought?
There's a few first impressions of rock and roll. One was hearing Great Balls of Fire, Jerry Lee Lewis, for the first time. A little bit later, I heard What I Say for the first time by Ray Charles. Previous to that, I'd heard Little Richard doing, whatever it was, Rip It Up or something.
Yeah.
Of course, that was very impressive. It's very hard to imagine being there when you first hear that. It's inexplainable. You think, oh my God, what is this? I grew up with Chuck Berry as well, and so it seemed like once a month he'd have a new record out. A friend of mine had a really good record player and was right on the pulse. And when it came out on a Friday, the new Chuck Berry, he had it at home, and we used to assemble there and listen to it. And you're talking about hearing Roll Over Beethoven for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
There was no radio. You didn't get it anywhere else. You only got it out of a jukebox or in someone's home. And all the B-sides on these records were very impressive as well. Can't remember the B-side of Roll Over Beethoven, but I'm sure you can find it out. It might have been, Memphis, Tennessee or something.
And did that influence you to become a piano player? Because, your playing would suggest a strong understanding of classical music.
Yeah, I was sent to piano lessons when I was about age 5. That was learning, after the scales and everything, it sort of moved on to classical things. And I continued that when I moved to Southend-on-Sea. I still went to piano lessons, but I think the teacher realised I wasn't really learning anything. And he said, what's the matter, I said, well, what I'd like to play is I'd like to play that Ray Charles song. Mm. And he actually wrote it out for me. And then he taught me all about chords and a little bit about boogie and left hand. And he instructed me from that side rather than just sitting there and being able to read music. It was like more how it was constructed and how you could put it down. And I learned to play more complicated chords. And, they were more complicated than what you had in a Chuck Berry song, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
But I kept this all to myself. This was private. But at school, they found I was a piano player. So I got invited to join a band at school. And I was showing them all the chords, so they were really happy because I could just listen to the record and I knew what the chords were. So I was instructing at an early age.
And then in 1963, you were actually signed to EMI in an R&B band called the 𝗃𝗃𝗧𝗘, which featured Robin Trower as well.
Yeah, well, we were all from the same town. The 𝗃𝗃𝗧𝗘, we were called. We were from the same town. We were young. We were at school, more or less together. And we grew up liking a lot of this music together and playing when we were at school still. And that went on until we actually got a contract with EMI, yeah. But I sound a bit croaky. It's because I've actually got hay fever at the moment. There's a lot of tree pollen around, and one of the first times it's affected me.
You got the allergies.
Yeah, I've got an allergy to it. Yeah.
The 𝗃𝗃𝗧𝗘s, were they managed by Brian Epstein's management company?
Oh, yes, we did at one point, yeah. We were with them for quite a few years. Well, it seemed a long time. Yeah, no, we had a meeting with Brian and he signed us up. NEMS, which I can't remember what it stood for.
Oh, I used to know.
No idea. Yeah, I used to know.
Yeah.
I think it was management services was the last bit. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
Anyway, we never saw much more of him after that. But within his organisation, they were very good looking after us and they helped us with gigs, really, concerts.
So you must have been sharing bills with like Beatles and Stones in those early years, I would imagine.
Oh, yes. Yes, we did. We did a tour with the Beatles. We actually used to play on the Stones tours as well. But that wasn't because of NEMS. We actually knew them from another side of things.
Right.
So we did the last UK Beatles tour, which was in the UK in 1965. And we were on that show, which toured Britain. I got to know them. They were great guys.
Did you have any chart success at that point? I know you did covers.
Well, in 1964, yeah, we weren't writing any of our own things. Nobody was writing anything for us either. we were still doing covers, like we had Poison Ivy, which was our first release, and that went in just about squeezed in the top 30. We did a Little Bitty Pretty One. We did Bad Blood, which was a coaster song, but that got banned by the BBC because they said it was about venereal disease. That's funny to get banned by the BBC.
Was that a 𝗵𝘃𝗶𝗁𝗘 song?
It was the Coasters. It probably is, yeah.
I got to look that one up. I don't know that one.
Yeah, I think it is. But then so was Poison Ivy, 𝗵𝘃𝗶𝗁𝗘.
How exactly did you go from an R&B sound to some of the most progressive, in the truest sense of the word, music that was ever made?
Oh, well, looking back at the time, I think by the time I got to, let's say, 18, and we retired the Paramounts, I was getting a bit tired of covering things, if you like. I think I wanted to write my own songs. That was the first thing I wanted to do. And I teamed up with Keith Reid at that point, who was writing lyrics. And, it seemed that I could actually write some songs. The influence for that sort of music that I was going to write, or did write, came from all the things I'd ever heard. And from all the classical music I'd ever heard, from all the rock and roll and blues I'd ever heard, and from all the Hawaiian music I'd ever heard. It was all kind of inside me, spinning around inside my head. And when I wrote something, I just thought, well, this is a good idea. Because I'd learned about chords, I could play chords all right. And so what came out of it was what you hear. White Shaded Pale and Conquistador, and She Wandered Through the Garden Fence, and lots more, hopefully. It was just sort of all those influences suddenly coming out in a new thing.
I want to talk about Keith Reid a little bit because it's somewhat unusual for a band to have a dedicated lyricist that isn't also one of the musicians in the band, like a proper member of the group, but he is. Can you explain that songwriting process?
Usually Keith would send me his words. Say, I got some new words. He might send, say, 6 lyric ideas, and I would try and write something to them, or they would fit a musical idea that I had in both the mood and the general meter of them, and that's how it worked. And he seemed to like them, and I liked them because that's why I'd written them, because I liked them. And that was all you needed, really. Well, we thought that was all you needed, was to actually write something that you thought was good. That, therefore, was a success to be able to do that. I wrote Conquistador before White Shade of Pale, and I can remember thinking that this would be good for the Beach Boys.
Wow.
But they never got that far. I'll have a word with one of the Beach Boys.
I can't picture Mike Love agreeing to do that song.
I'll tell him, I want to hear you do Conquistador, boys.
I heard you in another interview make a really great point, that it's very rare that a band's debut single isn't just a big hit, but it's synonymous with the band even 55 years later, like you did with White Shade of Pale. I can't think of any other acts, maybe Elton John with your song, but even at that, White Shade of Pale has outsold it tenfold.
Yeah.
Give me your thoughts on that. It's a great song, obviously, but why 55 years still being played?
I don't know the answer to it. To me, it's much easier to think that it's a mystery. One of the great mysteries. Because I honestly do not think that the words are immediately accessible. Your song you mentioned, it's quite easy to imagine what it's about and where you are, everything.
Right.
But with a White Shade of Pale, that's not easy, lyrically speaking. But it has got an atmosphere, which I think it was always there in the idea of the song, but particularly that mixture of a kind of a classical, and then I'm just wailing away over the top, really, to Keith Reid's sounding, but very different lyrics. And then we were very lucky in the studio. It was only 4-track at the time. I think that the sound we got there was kind of the best word I've ever heard for it, really, is that it was haunting. And if I hear it today on a radio or something, it still has the same sort of atmosphere and feeling. It doesn't sound dated. It just exists there hanging in the sky.
Right.
It just exists as this sound.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and internationally, it was a big, big hit. You can't tell me that somebody in Venezuela knew what I was singing about, but they liked the sound of it. And even if they didn't know it, it did not put them off buying this record. It didn't put the French off, and that takes a lot of doing.
You got to point out that it came out before Sgt. Pepper.
Yes, it did, actually. We hadn't heard Sgt. Pepper when White Shade of Pale came out, but they had heard a White Shade of Pale by the time Sgt. Pepper came out, although it was only probably a month or two later.
You know the famous story about John Lennon being at a party with Ray Coleman?
Well, that's probably to do with 𝗀𝗍𝗆𝗃𝗀.
It does. He was just so enthralled by it and was telling anyone who would listen that that's the record they got to listen to.
Yeah, he was very keen. Well, he got affected by it, as did quite a few million people. Of course, for it to be John Lennon, that's all right.
I don't want to belabor it, but one of the things that always intrigued me about 𝗀𝗍𝗆𝗃𝗀 is the lack of a definitive true stereo mix. Because I think your piano got buried when you listened to it.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate. Can you offer any insight into that? What happened?
Oh, well, that's, yeah. With 4 tracks, you're going to have the lead vocal on one, probably your bass and drums on one. I think we probably had piano and guitar on another one, and the organ on another one. And that was your 4 tracks taken up. And then you balance those 4 tracks. And the way it came out really was that there was the vocal and the organ, and the rest was going on behind. But it was only recorded in mono. There was only a mono mix, and anything else has been reprocessed.
Is it? Right.
But it sounded fine in mono.
𝗀𝗍𝗆𝗃𝗀.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Now, you toured with the Bee Gees a little later after that. And at that time, they were being kind of described as Baroque pop, whatever that means. I think their audience was more teeny bopper in origin than Procol Harum's. They used a string orchestra on stage. Was that the seed that sparked what would eventually be the collaboration with Edmonton, Canada's Symphony Orchestra?
I should think that probably was the start of it. I mean, we toured with the Bee Gees, Procol Harum, the Bee Gees, and they did a string orchestra with them, which accompanied, their songs, like Massachusetts or whatever it was.
Right.
I met the orchestra and I talked to them, and I was interested. I made good friends with the viola player. When we came to 𝗀𝗡 Dog, the album, and I wrote that song, nobody could actually think of anything to play on it, apart from me. I think B.J. Wilson, fair enough, he could, the drummer. But, Robin couldn't think of much on guitar, or the organist couldn't think of anything. And I said, well, I think I'd like to try and do a string orchestration. So that was the result. And this Victor from the orchestra, the viola player, he helped me put it together. And I used to check with him when I said, I'm writing these notes. Will they be all right on viola, cello, violin? And he would say yes or no. And that, I think, the interest that created, the particular song, 𝗀𝗡 Dog, with a string orchestra, led on to us playing at the Stratford Festival in Canada, and people from the Edmonton lot saw us at the Stratford Festival playing with an orchestra, and on it went. So yes, playing with the Bee Gees probably started that.
Conquistador, the live version from that concert, huge hit in 1972. I understand that was an afterthought in terms of the set list?
It was, yeah. I mean, Conquistador was on our first album, the actual tune.
Right.
And going up, when we were on our way to Edmonton, I did think, hang on, we haven't really got anything fast in here, anything up-tempo, a little bit more rocky or whatever you want to call it for Procol Harum anyway.
Yeah.
Everything else I'd worked on in 𝗀𝗆𝗃𝗀𝗃 in I, which of course was a mammoth piece at the time. Wailing Stories, I'd done that. I orchestrated that, So that was ready to go. The 𝗀𝗡 Dog and a couple more from our repertoire. I'd written all the orchestra and choir for. And I was sitting on the plane on the way up there, and I thought, I don't know why I thought Conquistador, but I then thought that it's not got much of a Spanish atmosphere, the original at all. But of course, Conquistador was one of these horse-backed warriors, if you like, of the Spanish, if you like, invasion of South America and Central America.
Right.
That's why I thought he was anyway. So I couldn't just orchestrate the original version of Conquistador. I just imagined it a bit bigger, a bit different. And of course, it then had the introduction, which was sort of, reiterating the chords in some way, but getting some horse galloping in there and getting a trumpet, which was actually had to know where's mariachi, isn't it? It's pure mariachi.
It is.
But that's Central American anyway. It just gave it a lot more atmosphere and made it a bit more interesting piece, and it worked on the night.
Help me settle something with that song, because if you look up online the lyrics, you can look it up 4 times and get 4 different results.
Oh, really?
The refrain, although I hope for something to find, I could see no maze to unwind, or lace?
Yes.
Or
No, Maze, M-A-Z-E.
that's what I thought. If you look it up, it says lace.
Yeah. Silly buggers.
Even on Wikipedia.
Well, I've seen one version where it wasn't even called Conquistador. It was called Come Kiss the Door.
Oh. No, Come Kiss the Door. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I want to switch topics a little bit and talk about something that I don't know how many of our listeners even realize, but you played piano on George Harrison's 1970 debut effort, All Things Must Pass, specifically on My Sweet Lord. Can you tell me how that came about?
Let me think. Well, I mean, George, when we were on tour with the Beatles, George was always very friendly. That's 1965. We come to sort of 1967, and I've seen them a few times in the course of moving around, because now we're famous. We've got a big #1 hit, and they're still the Beatles. And you run into them now and again. Anyway, I used to go to some nice clubs and that where George would be there. And Paul McCartney was a good club goer as well. And Ringo, in fact. They all like clubs. But that sort of continued in that you're always in touch with your fellow musicians and artists. But I don't mean you're in touch. But if you haven't seen somebody for 25 years and you saw them tomorrow night by chance in a restaurant, it would be as if you'd seen each other yesterday.
Right.
There's just that sort of relationship usually between musicians and singers and everything that respect each other. And I was sitting at home 1960, whenever it was. I think it was probably 1969. I've always thought it was.
Yep.
And I lived round the corner from Abbey Road. And there's a call saying, George, I'd like you to come and play. He's making an album. So I was round. It took me 10 minutes to get there. And I was there. And, of course, there was quite a large gathering. I was enthralled because Phil Spector was in the control booth. Mm-hmm. George was there and welcomed me and everybody. Yeah, that was nice. But they had good players there. Two drummers. Ringo was one of them. Can't remember the other one. It'll be on the LP.
Yeah, either Alan White or Jim Keltner.
It wasn't Jim Keltner. I think it must have been Alan White.
Alan White. I think Eric Clapton would have been.
Yeah, I think Eric Clapton was there. There was about 5 people strumming. I remember the 2 Badfinger guys were there.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
2 boys from Badfinger.
Yep.
They were strumming. George was strumming. Eric was strumming. There was plenty of strum going on.
Yeah.
There was somebody else. I think somebody was playing the harmonium. I was playing the piano. Tambourine players and, there's quite a lot of people anyway.
A lot of takes or?
No.
No?
No, we had to learn it, but it didn't take once or twice run through. And then it was let's take it. And then we took it, went back into the box to hear it, and it was nothing like what I'd just been playing because it was Phil Spector's wall of sound, full echo on everything.
Procol Harum toured extensively for at least that first 10-year incarnation. Any memories of a worse gig?
Well, you can't remember them all. There were so many good gigs. Well, no, I think we went to play on Long Island once. And, the great problem with early Procol Harum was getting a decent piano. And then that piano had to be in tune with a Hammond organ because you could not change either tuning quickly,
Of course.
So a piano had to be tuned to a certain pitch, say 440, just like the Hammond is at. Otherwise, the 2 instruments are out of tune. And so that was our continual bane, was getting that right. And, just how many phone calls every day to make sure that the piano had been tuned. And we went to Long Island to play, said, is it piano tuned? All the same questions. Yeah, he worked it down to his fingernails. I went to see it, and there was dust all over the keyboard that hadn't been touched. And I tried it, and it was most appalling. It was unplayable. So we actually walked out. It was some kind of mafia connection promoter, and he was going to kill us all. And then he decided we weren't worth it. But it was the gig that wasn't, because we walked out. But that always sticks in my mind, that particularly the death threats.
Yeah, I'd call that a bad night.
A good night. You certainly have trouble beating Edmonton, because it was a fabulous sound playing with that symphony orchestra and choir.
Right.
The end of In 𝗀𝗄𝗧 in was like, everybody was lifted up, rose from their seats, floating in the air. But apart from that, we had most gigs were pretty good. We did a lot of college gigs in the early days, in 68, 69 and that, and they were great things because they were good audiences, and the time was right. We built up a lot of good kudo in those years playing. And even today, people will come up to me, some professor of law, and say, hey, I saw you in 1968 in Utica, or wherever it was. They're now professional people and academics of different sorts, and they started out as Procol Harum fans.
See that? That must be a great feeling.
Yeah. Well, that's what happens when you play in universities, campuses.
Of course. I don't know if this is an appropriate question, but you've had so many different incarnations with Procol Harum. When you think of that lineup with yourself and Matt Fisher and Robin and B.J. Wilson, God rest his soul, and Dave Knights, you consider that the definitive lineup, or do you not think in those terms?
I don't think in those terms, and I wouldn't agree that we've had so many lineups. I mean, that was our first lineup, and really the next one was when 𝗵𝘃𝗶𝗵𝗁 came in on guitar and 𝗃𝗀𝗶𝗁𝗵𝘃 on organ, and that lasted what seemed forever. I think actually it was only about 5 years, but it seemed like a lifetime.
Right.
I think we did have one little change right on the last album of that era, where 𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗍𝗍 played the organ and 𝗃𝗀𝗶𝗵𝗁 went on to bass.
Right.
BJ was always there. I was always there, and never seemed that different to me. And it's not like, hey, we're going out on tour, let's find some new people.
No, right.
It's never been like that. Being in Procol Harum is a bit more social as well. There's some sort of loyalty in it. You have to be into it. You have to really be into it.
My favorite Procol Harum album, one of the greatest albums of the 70s, was Grand Hotel.
Well, it was a good lineup. It was the first time that lineup had been in the studio with 𝗵𝘃𝗶𝗵𝗁, who was a very, very able, a beautiful guitarist, in fact. We did 4 albums with Mick, probably which over the case, of course, of 4 years probably, although it now seems like a lifetime. But he played such memorable stuff. He was never following what Robin Trower had done. Because if you went down that alley, that would be a disastrous way to go. You've got to be your own man. And 𝗵𝘃𝗶𝗵𝗁 was his own man. And he played his own guitar, and he added a new musical area to Procol Harum that hadn't been there before.
Sure.
And much more musical than Robin Trower. Robin Trower was so unmusical that it sounded like there was this devil going on. There was this underlying influence. But it's only because he couldn't play more than 4 chords.
Okay.
With the greatest respect, I say that.
Right.
Because he didn't know a lot of the chords that I was playing, he then played big bass, big bottom notes on the guitar.
Right.
Or popped up the top screaming just over a whole section of chords, And that was a new thing. But now you often hear that power bottom guitar note backing up chords and that. But Robin invented it, really.
Do you consider that album one of your favorites?
Which one?
Grand Hotel.
Oh, sorry, back to Grand Hotel. It's been a long time since we've been in the studio. We've done Broken Barricades, then Robin left, we had a little bit of a changeover, and of course then we did Edmonton. That was our next release. By the time we got to Grand Hotel, we hadn't really been in the studio for 2 or 3 years or written any new songs.
Right.
So there was a lot of ideas going on. Usually, I find a lot of the songs on there are quite schizophrenic. They seem to have 2 parts. But they are, in fact, probably 2 songs welded together. But it was it was a brand new studio, Air Studios. We had a great producer, Chris Thomas, and, we were riding high, really. It was the last poke at messing around with orchestras for a while. Mm-hmm. But we thought, well, we haven't really, since we've been Salty Dog, but nothing since. Let's put some orchestra on some of these in a nice studio atmosphere. I suppose Grand Hotel was the actual song was all in that, really. And then we moved on back to rock and roll after that album.
Well, we mentioned Leiber and Stoller earlier, and they produced an entire album for you guys.
Yeah. I think there was some idea that because they were songwriters, and Reed and I were songwriters, that there would be something really in common. And Leiber and Stoller also produced and got songs onto vinyl. That was their job as well.
Right.
And they had done that with many people, from Benny King to the Drifters and lots more, good track record. But also, very importantly, at that particular point where we were thinking we need a different producer, they came to England and produced an album with Steeler's Wheel. And that showed us that A, they were alive, B, that they did come across the pond, and C, that they were willing to work with outside people.
Right.
It didn't have to be black people or Americans or anything. So we approached them and they said, yeah, we'd like to do that. And so over they came and, they had a strange way of working, Jerry and Mike.
How so?
I mean, the first day's recording, I think it was about 7:30. When Mike and Jerry said, well, we're off to dinner now. So we said, oh, all right then. Well, what time are you being back? They said, we ain't coming back. We're going for dinner. That's the end of the day. We sat there in the studio the rest of the day playing old 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗃 songs to ourselves.
Yeah. So they kept workman's hours.
Yeah. 10:30 till 7:30.
And you're probably used to work until 2 a.m.
Which was is a long enough day. There was nothing wrong with that at all.
And you had a big hit, Pandoras Box.
Well, that was a fantastic effort. I'm very glad. I mean, by that time, of course, it really helped an album if you had a hit on it, just to make people aware you had one out. So I expect we needed that. We didn't write Pandora's Box as a commercial hit single.
Right.
But it had the things that Procol Harum songs have, bit quirky, strange lyrics, a tune that nobody had heard before, an approach. But the mix 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗃 did for it was, I thought it was fantastic. When I first heard it, I thought, well, is that us playing? Is that what we recorded? It was just the way they put it all together. Wonderful rhythm and everything.
Now, shortly after, in 1977, you guys broke up. What led up to that?
I think there's lots of things, but I think that we went to Miami to make what was by then our 10th album, Something Magic, and we had a lot of songs for it, but we had chosen to work with a couple of guys in Miami at the Criteria Studios. We thought that would make a change, be something a bit fresh and new. Of course, it's a wonderful place to go and make a record in Miami. Oh, yeah. But they didn't seem very keen on the songs that we had. They liked 2 or 3 of them, but generally they weren't very impressed.
Now, who were they? Who were the producers?
Ron and 𝗷𝗃𝗃𝗃.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Yep.
And they really did not encourage us there. There was a few other ideas that were around, and I had one. Keith had written this very long story thing called The Worm of the Tree, and I had now and again been thinking about it and working on it, but it wasn't by any means finished, or the thought was not really congealed. But they suddenly thought, well, that was a good idea. So we did it, and I put orchestra on it as well. And that made up half the album, really, because it was nearly 20 minutes long. Mm. It was spoken word. It wasn't even singing. I never got that advanced with it to actually sing these words. So I spoke it, and we finished the album there. And there we were, 1970, it was the end of 1976. The Eagles are next door in the studio making Hotel California. Disco is churning out all over the place, and the punks have chucked any decent band out of Britain. What have we come up with? A 20-minute long spoken word fairy tale. And we did think at that point that we'd sort of gone full circle. And maybe it was just time to we'd gone full circle. It's over. And we just stopped. We didn't say, let's have a year off or anything like that. We just stopped. And we all said goodbye to each other and went our separate ways.
Well, the obvious follow-up question to why the breakup, what was the motivating factor to get Procol Harum back together and back on the road?
Well, the internet, really. Well, I mean, just as the internet started and America Online started, and people talked, there was chat rooms and things. And somebody sent me the transcripts of this chat room. And there was a girl talking to a boy, or a man talking to a woman, don't know how old they were. And she said, or I can't remember who said, but one of them said, what about, do you like music? He said, yeah. Well, who's your favorite? And this guy said, Procol Harum. And she said, Procol Harum? I don't believe it. I thought I was the only person in the world that liked Procol Harum. This is in 1980, whatever, 88, 89, when the internet started to boom. And then somebody else phoned in or connected or came to the chat room and said, yeah, I dig Procol Harum too, always have. What's happened to him? And suddenly There were about 90 people in the chat room, and they were all regretting the loss of Procol Harum and what happened. Where are they? What that made me think at that point was, oh, there's somebody out there that is concerned, that actually still likes us. And actually, I did some American DJ things. They got together in London a few times, about 6 radio stations from America, came with DJs, and then they had all the old stars in England would be invited, go up and have a chat with the DJs. And I went to several of these, and I was amazed that these DJs were still talking of us in very nice terms. Oh, yeah, but let's have Simple Sister, yeah. Let's do Whiskey Train, whatever it was. And they're still playing it. And it was like we'd never gone anywhere to these American DJs. And that greatly encouraged me. Anyway, all those little thoughts, I thought maybe we could try to do something again. And I asked Keith Reid about this, and he agreed. So we tried to write some songs, and they worked all right, and it went from there, We got, Robin came and played on that one. Matthew Fisher came and played on it. Some of those relationships weren't to last, but it seemed a good idea at the time.
Sure.
And anyway, it got us back, and we've been strong ever since, really, although we still haven't put out an album every year by any stretch.
How do you feel the music business has changed? I mean, we all know how it's changed, but is it more conducive to the way you like to work or less conducive? Do you like the old way better in terms of big marketing record companies, or do you prefer you can practically do everything yourself now and cut out the middlemen?
Well, middlemen can be a dirty word, or it can also be a very, very fine way for somebody to make a living. Groups through the years have had good and bad experiences with record companies. I mean, we spent a lot of personal time with A&M, who were a fine company, and also we spent a lot of time with 𝗀𝗧𝗃, who were a fine company. And we worked very closely with the people involved. They were interested when you went in to make a new record. I mean, we wouldn't have made Edmonton without A&M. We couldn't have afforded at the time to have taken a recording truck from California to Edmonton.
Of course.
Just on the chance. They backed the idea. I miss those days when the record companies were adding something. I don't think they hardly exist now. And when the accountants got involved, the accountants started taking over. Instead of a record company saying, these boys have got something, and maybe the first album, maybe even the second album doesn't do so good, but they stick with it. And then suddenly the third album, it's gold, and they finally made it. But they believed in the talent and the artists.
Right.
That is not there anymore. Now, if your first album doesn't sell, the accountants say, hey, we lost money on that. They're out. End of that. I miss record stores. I miss the hard fact of holding something.
Vinyl's making a bit of a comeback for sure.
Oh, well, there we are.
Yeah, there's a whole generation of kids now who don't want to just download songs. You must be familiar with Record Store Day. Your first album
I'm familiar with that.
All right. So your first record was repressed last year, I believe.
I don't think we're back to ground. We aren't back to ground zero yet.
No. What's the next project that we can look forward to?
As I said at the start there, we have Missing Persons EP coming out, Procol Harum, on May the 7th. You can sort of look that up somewhere and find it. Of course, we're still in COVID. There are no gigs yet.
Right.
We actually have one on July 3rd at Hampton Court Palace in London. We don't know if it will go ahead. We won't know for another 2 or 3 weeks.
Well, that's cutting it close, huh?
Oh, it's the very last opportunity, yeah. It is cutting it close. But the government will not say, if they drop social distancing, it will go ahead. If there's social distancing, it won't.
I want to thank Gary Brooker for being on the It's Only Rock and Roll podcast. And Procol Harum's new EP, Missing Persons, is available on Amazon and wherever fine music is streamable. I know it's not a real word. Be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes, and if so inclined, leave a 5-star rating and a kind word or two in the review section. Remember, all of our past shows are available for streaming at www.itsonlyrockandrollpodcast.com. Visit us on social media at Facebook and Instagram at It's Only Rock and Roll Podcast, all typed out as one word, no spaces or commas, please. Until next time, kids.